Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm so glad to be back here. Thanks to Tom and thanks to the Allen Public Library for allowing me to come back and talk with you about the subject of women in the rodeos. I am someone that's been writing about the women of the American West for more than 30 years, and I have penned 56 books, most of them on that particular subject. I have deviated a couple of times from that particular ideal. I have written a book called The Death Row All-Stars, which is a story about a baseball team in 1911 in Wyoming that as long as they played baseball and won, they got stays of execution. It was quite a unique team. The warden himself was betting on the game, and one of the gentlemen in prison was the captain of the baseball team, who also happened to be the best friend of the warden, and he was the one that would go out in town and collect the bets. But as it turns out, so many other higher-ups in Wyoming was betting on that team, including the congressmen's. And so, I just thought about that when they introduced the congressman. I thought, how's it going? That was 1911. So it's a fascinating topic. But I just brought that up to show you that I've written about some other things. I've done 2 books about Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. I did a book about John Wayne called The Young Duke, and also a book about Sam Six Killer, who was a Native American lawman in Oklahoma. And prior to Sam Six Killer being killed in the line of duty, there was no law about killing a Native American lawman in the line of duty. So it's a fascinating story. But I'm here today to talk to you about women of the rodeos. I was quite fascinated with this, and I've written quite a lot about women who entertained in the American West, women who were singers and dancers and actresses. And one of the women that I covered in that book was a woman by the name of Klondike Kate. And Klondike Kate was this amazing entertainer in the Yukon area who would come out dressed head to toe in chiffon, and she would spin around as quickly as she possibly could in this red chiffon, and it would span out all around. She had a hat with red chiffon and a cane with red chiffon on it, and the faster she twirled, the more that red chiffon would stand out, and it would look like from a distance she was on fire. And she was known as the Flame of the Yukon. And that was her whole act. And doing the research for that, I came across some of these amazing cowgirls who also performed. Their job was to be able to entertain audiences who came to see different shows. So I want to start out with a conversation that a couple of ladies had in Cheyenne at what would be known as the Cheyenne Frontier Days. And this happened in the early 1900s. Coming soon, read the billboards, World Championship Rodeo, $10,000 in cash prizes, biggest, wildest, most thrilling rodeo ever held. What's a rodeo? Inquired the lady in the large, wide-brimmed hat decorated with plumes and flowers. Darned if I know, replied the woman in the puffed blouse and fluted skirt. Well, let's go and find out. Within the first 5 minutes, they got more thrills than they ever had in all their lives. They saw a cowboy leap from the back of a running horse to the hurricane deck of a galloping steer, a great wild brute fresh from the Great Plains, weighing 900 pounds, and every pound full of fight. The steers seemed to be the meanest, most devilish animals that ever walked on 4 feet. But there were nothing compared to the outlaw horses the women watched trying to throw the riders. So the attraction was called a rodeo. And at that particular time, it was no place for a weakling, and they thought that women might be that women just couldn't take what the men were having to go through being rodeo stars. But women proved them wrong. The very first woman to be called a cowgirl was Lucille Mulhall. and Lucille Mulhall was born in Oklahoma in 1885. Her father was Colonel Zach Mulhall, and he owned this magnificent ranch that went on forever and ever and ever. And Lucille was, he had 4 or 5 children, but Lucille was one of two daughters. And she just doted on her father and wanted to do whatever she could to please him, and loved riding horses. And her mother said that she really never saw her early in her life when she wasn't on a horse, riding by the time that she was 5 years old. And as she grew up to be a teenager, she worked for her father on the ranch, being able to go out and round up the cows, the stray livestock that got away. So her job was to be able to help the cowboys rope those renegade cows and steers and bring them back around. And she was so good at it. She was a lot better than many of the cowboys. And her father struck a deal with her, and he said, you know, whatever steers and cows that you go and get and bring back here, I am going to give you, you can keep them. Whatever runaways you find, that you can keep them. And he was sad that he struck that deal with her, because by the end of the first season, she had a lot of livestock to her name. And so she started developing her own little ranch. But by the time she was 15, she started performing in her father's Wild West shows. Now, at this particular time in 1903, 1904, you had many Wild West shows competing with one another, because that was a form of talent. I was talking to you a few moments ago about the women like Yukon Kate, who came and entertained. Entertainment was at a premium. We kind of take that for granted because there's so much for us to be able to turn to, books and movies and such. But that wasn't necessarily the case in the American frontier. So not only do people want to enjoy their time being entertained, but they also wanted to be educated. And just being able to see these Wild West shows, especially if you were east of the Mississippi, you had no concept of what this was really like. So you would go to a Wild West show and you would see, you know, cowboys roping. You would see reenactments of stagecoaches being robbed, and it was quite a show. And Lucille Mulhall rode for her father in the show, and she was really good. As I said, I mean, you've got to be good if you're helping your father round up runaway animals on the farm, on the ranch rather. And so she was terribly good at what she did. And so she learned to rope on the ranch, helping her father gather up the cattle for branding. By the time she was 18, she was a full-fledged partner in her father's business. So that just goes to show you how good she was. But she parlayed that into the Wild West shows. And at 15, she's doing these Wild West shows in front of politicians such as Vice President at that time, Theodore Roosevelt, who sees her from the stands. And he's the one that said, gosh, looks like we got ourselves a cowgirl. And so they started referring to her as a cowgirl ever since, at that particular point. One of the other gentlemen with the Wild West show, because a lot of these women acts came out of the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch. Not so with Lucille. Of course, she's born on her father's ranch and then parlays that into his Wild West show. But the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch also had a Wild West show, and they had some women that rode for them from there, but none of them as good as Lucille Mulhall. One of the men that she met at the Miller Brothers 101 Ranch, who eventually came to work for her father for a little bit, was Will Rogers. And Will Rogers was a trick roper, and he taught Lucille how to be a trick roper too, and she was really good. In this book, you're going to find so many stories of ladies who made their mark on rodeo, but not just what they did professionally, but what they did in their personal life. And sometimes I think that their personal life kind of overshadowed what they did in the ring because it was so varied. As I'm doing the research on these women, I can't believe how often they were married. They were in and out of marriages 4 and 5 times. Lucille Mulhall was no exception to the rule. She was married 2 or 3 times. And She had a son with her first husband who was an opera star with the Wild West show. I know you're thinking, why would anybody need an opera star with the Wild West show? But he was very good. So he would come out into the arena and he would just regale them with songs. And then there would be horse riding acts that took place around him. And he was just wonderful. So he and Lucille fall in love, get married, and have a son. Lucille was really good inside the rodeo ring and being able to rope and ride, but she was a terrible wife. She was a terrible mother. She spent very little time with her son. In fact, her first husband is the one that raised her son. So she always had some strife there. But the only person she really cared about pleasing all the time was her father. And so when her father dies, father and mother die in a car accident. I'm sorry, they don't die in a car accident. When they pass away, she's just broken. And so she goes in and out of marriages after that. And she's still working in rodeos and still known as the champion lady rider and roper of the world. But she's never really quite the same, and her personal life is never stable. She is killed in a car accident on December 21st, 1940. Not too long after a gentleman that she was purported to be romantically entwined with, and that was Tom Mix. Tom Mix also dies in a car accident, so just ironic that the two of them romantically involved also die in a car accident not too far apart from one another. I've chosen some of my very favorite women from the book to talk to you about, and another one that the first one I want to talk to you about is Fox Hastings. Fox Hastings was somebody that was gifted in a sport in rodeo that usually they thought women couldn't do because it was really very strenuous for men to do. It was a sport called bulldogging. I don't know if you're not familiar with bulldogging, you would ride out into the middle of the arena on your horse chasing after a steer. You would jump off of your horse, grabbing the reins of the steer and pulling that steer down. Fox learned about that particular sport from rodeo stunt actually, from Bill Pickett. Bill Pickett was the phenomenal bulldogger, but Pickett was injured numerous times. And so most men wouldn't attempt that particular stunt. But in 1924, Fox Hastings becomes the first to perform the trick in front of fans at the Houston Stock Show. Her time being able to go out, ride the horse, drag that steer down was 17 seconds. So the idea that women couldn't do that it was too tough was kind of blown out of the water because of Fox Hastings. She herself marries a bulldogger and starts roping and riding. She was roping and riding by the time she was 14 years old. And her first competition was in Sacramento in 1912. She was routinely billed as the bucking horse champion of Cheyenne because in addition to doing bulldogging, couldn't do that all the time, she was well-rounded. She also rode a lot of bucking horses and would come out of the chute like lightning and stuck in the saddle for a long period of time. But as Tom was mentioning, many times these women were injured, and Fox was no exception. She starts bulldogging in 1925, and she's seriously injured in 24 and in 25 doing that stunt. She ends up on top of the steer who's trying to get her off, and he runs her into a wall on the side of the rodeo arena. And she does have broken ribs. She has a broken wrist. A lot of times, people like Fox Hastings, women like Fox Hastings, would just have themselves taped up and then just go right out afterwards and ride again. An injury didn't keep them down long. Again, what fascinated me about Fox was not only what she did inside the ring, but her personal life. Married numerous times. She is divorced to yet another husband in 1929, and she remarries a rodeo star. She's divorced in the summer of 29 and remarries a rodeo star in October of 1929. And they moved to Winslow, Arizona. Her husband, who she's very much in love with, is diagnosed there with tuberculosis. And she quits the rodeo to be able to take care of him. And she cared for him until his death in 1948. And it wasn't tuberculosis that got him, it was a heart attack. And Fox was terribly upset about losing him and thought that she would be alone forever, and ends up at a place in Phoenix called the Hotel Adams. And on August 15, 1948, she dies of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. First, she shoots herself in the stomach, and that doesn't end it for her, and there's a lot of pain, so she shoots herself in the head. So, and I never thought that there was anything odd about that, because if you can bulldog, I suppose you can survive a gunshot wound to the gut and then have the presence of mind to shoot yourself in the head. But again, just to show how incredibly tough some of these women were to do what they did. Prairie Rose Henderson is another one of the ladies that I wrote about. And I'm sure you guys have probably heard of Prairie Rose Henderson, if not associated with the rodeo, maybe with the song or something like that. But Prairie Rose was quite popular. She was born in Ohio in February 1875, and again, married for the first time in 1893 and moved with her husband to Sweetwater, Wyoming. She was an amazing relay racer, and she was part of the Frontier Days in Cheyenne in 1899 as a relay racer. She really kind of coined the whole dressing up and making your costume look really great when you're on a horse in the middle of the arena. She didn't want anybody to not be able to pick her out from the other women that might have been riding in the rodeo. She had a distinct look. And at the end of the event, I'll be up there with my books, and I've got some great pictures. So you just be able to take a look at Prairie Rose Henderson and the costumes that she wore. But she traveled with a variety of Wild West shows, as a lot of these women did. Not only did they participate in rodeos, but they were also in Wild West shows, because during the rodeo season, you could jump out of the Wild West show season and be able to hop over and do some rodeos and supplement your income. You couldn't make it all up at the Wild West shows. You had to really be out there working the rodeos and hoping to win to be able to keep yourself in some money as you're out on the road. She officially burst onto the rodeo scene in El Paso, Texas in 1912, riding bucking broncs. From there, she entered roping contests and traveled across country competing and performing. She took home top box prizes in bucking horse contests, and she's known for sticking in her saddle and her magnificent way that she dressed. As I said, I've got some great pictures, not only of her, but of some of the other rodeo stars, because these ladies felt like they needed to dress uniquely, and you'll be able to see some of those pictures. Some women wore giant bows on their head. Again, they wanted you to be able to see who they were as they were riding and being bucked off the horses or whatever. Again, as I said, what was amazing to me about these women were their personal lives. And Prairie Rose Henderson had a tragic personal life. Her daughter in 1919 dies of the Spanish flu. And she divorces her husband and then is seeking desperately to find someone else to marry. And she's in and out of marriages at that point until 1929, when she gets divorced and remarries again. But in between that time, she makes the leap from being in the rodeo shows and being in the Wild West shows to being a stunt woman for early motion pictures, which a lot of these women did. And not only were they stunt women in motion pictures, early motion pictures, and did the acts that some of the female stars couldn't or weren't allowed to do, but they were also called in to do some of the stunts that men weren't able to do. If you see some of those early silent films and you see the men riding away from the bad guys and you see them jumping chasms, that was generally not a man that was jumping the chasm with the horse. It was generally a woman, because she was lighter in the saddle and the horse was able to go a little bit further with a woman in the saddle. So a lot of times it was a woman that was a stunt person. I thought that was incredibly fascinating too. But in 1929, she marries a gentleman by the name of, hang on, I'm going to sneeze. God bless me. Excuse me. She marries a cow thief, of all things. She marries a guy by the name of Charles Coleman, and he's just a low-down, dirty dog. But she's infatuated with him, and the two of them have this cattle ranch there in the Rawlins area. And the authorities finally come by their place in 1933 and arrest him for cattle thievery, and take him in. And while he's being handcuffed and taken away, he tells Rose, "Don't worry about taking care of the livestock this evening. I'm going to get out of this, and I'll be home before you know it." Well, he wasn't home, and Rose realizes that she's going to have to take care of the livestock, and that's exactly what she does. But she happened to go out and take care of the animals when there was a snowstorm that covered the region, and she ends up missing, and no one can find her. Her body is discovered. Now, keep in mind, this is in 1933, in February of 1933. Her body isn't discovered until 1939, July 1939. And it's discovered by a sheep herder. Only her skeleton and clothing were identified. She was wearing one of the belt buckles that she had won at one of the rodeos. So I thought that not only were they accomplished in the ring, in the rodeo ring, but they had these personal lives that were so tragic that you had to be just as tough inside the rodeo arena as you did at home, I suppose. One of the favorite women that I wrote in the book, and I'll show you a picture of her when we get in the back there, was a relay racer in rodeos by the name of Kitty Knut. I don't think that Kitty Knut, if she hit 5 foot, she would have been lucky. She's a tiny thing, and she was married to a gentleman by the name of Yakima Knut. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Well, Yakima Knut was one of the very first stuntmen in motion pictures. He was quite accomplished at what he did. He and John Wayne revolutionized the way that you see fighting on film. And if you've ever seen the movie Stagecoach, there's an amazing stunt where Yakima Knut goes under the stagecoach and comes out the other end. He was really fearless and revolutionized the stunt work in Hollywood at that time. There wasn't anything he wouldn't do. As I said, he was married to Kitty Knut. And Kitty Knut, I also mentioned that she was a relay racer in the rodeos. And what Kitty Knut would do if she lost a race to someone that she thought had cheated, she was in the habit of taking a 2x4 to those women. She was quite violent, quite volatile all the time. And as tough as Yakima Knut was, and he was over 6 feet tall, and he could do just about any stunt and take just about any abuse, but he could not take Kitty. She was way too fierce for him, way too abusive for him, and so they end up divorcing. But she is, as I said, she married Yakima. She married Yakima in 1916, and she physically fought a lot of women that she thought was cheating. She was even disqualified from a rodeo in 1918 for hitting a competitor in the mouth with a piece of wood. So I just find what these women did outside of the arena just as fascinating as what they did inside. Another lady that I got to write about in the book that I was particularly enamored with was a woman by the name of Hazel Hickey Moore. And I was enamored with her because her daughter, her granddaughter, her great-granddaughter, and her great-great-granddaughter have all stayed in rodeo. So it's just been a legacy of rodeo riders. And so I want to read a little bit of the Hazel Hickey Moore chapter, just to show you how talented these women were and the showmanship that was involved with being able to display their talent in different shows. Hundreds of cheering fans flocked to the train depot in Kansas, Kansas, on Sunday, October 24th, 1920, to welcome the Yankee Robinson Circus in town. When the cast and crew alighted from the multiple cars, the men, women, and children on hand to greet them applauded excitedly. Most of the townspeople followed the performers and workers as they made their way to the locations where the circus was to be created. In a flurry of organized chaos, canvas tents were raised, the big top was sprawled on the ground, and the mid stood under the seams, lacing pieces together, other men with sledgehammers pounding the stakes into the ground at breakneck speeds. So then comes the night of the show. And what you would hear if you were in the show was, if you attended the show, was a 22-piece band who furnished the music. Oh, wait, I jumped. Let me go back. After they get everything put together with the tents and all that, the following evening, ticket buyers hustled into the tent as tall as the sky and watched in raptured wonder of the camels and the llamas, zebras, bears, lions, as they were paraded around the arena by trapeze artists, jugglers, clowns, and acrobats dressed in elaborate costumes. A ringmaster hurried to his place in the center of the activity and announced the start of the show. The lights slowly dimmed, and the hush fell over the crowd. Suddenly, a stunning woman on a black horse emerged from somewhere no one noticed and rode out in front of the transfixed patrons. Hazel Hickey, and that's a name to draw to, known as the prima donna equestrian, led her ride through a series of trots, pirouettes, and canters before serenading the audience with a beautiful rendition of Irving Berlin's song, Blue Skies. She was adorned in an elegant gown of her own making. Her hair and eyes shimmered in the spotlight, as did her horse's mane. Hazel urged her ride over to a large box in the middle of the arena, and the animal used his nose to lift the lid. At that point, a dozen doves raced out of the box and flew to various points in the rafters. Hazel continued guiding her horses through the myriad of dressage steps while she sang in a high soprano voice. One by one, the doves flew to her and lighted on her head and shoulders and on the back of the horses. So that's just an example of what they did, and I've got some great pictures of Hazel in here. And Hazel, her life was exciting, but exciting in a good way. She did a lot of wonderful things, and it was a pleasure to be able to write about Hazel Hickey more. And then the family helped me. Her granddaughter and great-granddaughter helped me put the story together. And then at the end of it, they gifted me with one of Hazel Hickey Moore's scarves, which I'll never wear. I'll just keep forever as a commemoration of all that Hazel did. Another lady I would like to talk to you about that I found her story particularly inspiring, and that was a lady by the name of May Manning Lilly. Now, May Manning Lilly was married to a gentleman who had his own Wild West show, and his name was Pawnee Bill. Pawnee Bill's Wild West show was quite famous on its own, and then it got even more so when it paired with the Buffalo Bill Cody Wild West show, late in Cody's life. And Pawnee Bill was not only an accomplished equestrian and a businessman, but he was also someone who was a school teacher and taught the Native Americans on the Pawnee Indian Reservation. And he raised buffalo, and he was just a well-rounded, gifted person in many areas. He ends up being the vice president of a bank. He just really is a great businessman, and that's why I think that the banks seek him out. But he's married to May Manning Lilly, and they marry at a very young age, and he's with a Wild West show. So after he gets married, he takes her to his home in Kansas, and then he goes off on the Wild West show. In time, she has a child, and the little boy is more than 10 pounds when he's born. And May can't do much. She's in bed for more than a week. And then she's so excited when, his name is Gordon Lilly, when Pawnee Bill or Gordon Lilly comes home, she's very excited to be able to show him that they now have a son. And when she got up, she had a difficult time physically being able to do that and was rushed to the doctor and was told then that she'd never be able to have any other children. And not too long after that, their son died. He was only 6 weeks old when he passed away. And May was just completely distraught and couldn't really be persuaded to do much, but just kind of lay around in bed and just lament what had happened. And she would watch her husband and the other ranch hands working the horses, trying to tame the horses. And she thought, I think I could do that. And so not only did that inspire her to get out and learn how to ride, but her husband taught her how to shoot. And he would take her on hunting trips. Eventually, she becomes this magnificent champion rifle shot riding side saddle. And I say riding side saddle because Annie Oakley was really good at it, but she was riding astride, but not May Manning. She was quite accomplished at what she did riding side saddle. And she does join her husband's show, and they travel everywhere. They travel all around the world performing. I wish I had one of the pictures here, but perhaps you have seen it. One of the very first posters ever done of a woman in a rodeo, that's just the woman by herself, is May Manning Lilly, and she's got a pistol pointed right at the camera. And that was one of the very first posters done of a woman by herself in a poster. But not only that, but everywhere you went around the room, the guns seemed to follow you. So it was a very popular poster, and that was May in that poster. She rode for years in Pawnee Bill's show, and she was quite accomplished. She was in Pawnee Bill's show. Annie Oakley rode with Bill's show for one season, and she was very good friends with May, and they got on very well. May didn't really she wasn't a jealous woman. She was happy to acquiesce to Annie Oakley because she knew most people came to see Annie Oakley. But that's not to say that May wasn't accomplished at what she did. She helped her husband with different acts because he had his own shooting act too. And she would hold up different cards, and he would shoot the cards out of her hand. He missed one night and took off a couple of her digits. She ended up not being able to be a rifle shot anymore, but she had to be a pistol shot because she couldn't cock the lever of the rifle anymore. But she stayed on with the show. As I said, a very accomplished woman. The only thing that she left the show for was when Pawnee Bill decided, I think it must have been around 1907, maybe earlier than that he decided that he was going to do a show with Buffalo Bill Cody. That was the one time that May said, I think I'm going to leave the show. She wasn't really crazy about Cody's business sense. She didn't think that he has any business sense, and she proved to be right about that. And she thought he was a womanizer, which indeed Cody was that. Cody was a very popular guy, and everywhere he went, women fawned all over him, and he fell into that quite a bit of time. So May did not care for him because of all those reasons I just stated. Another pair that I'd like to talk to you about are a couple of cowgirls by the name as the Perry sisters. And the Perry sisters would disguise themselves as men and go out into the rodeo arena. They were amazing trick ropers and riders, and they would go out into the arena with the Buffalo Bill show looking like men, and so the audience didn't think anything of it, and they would do amazing things. They did this whole reenactment of a stagecoach being robbed and a wild team being out of control, and one of them had to jump on top of the horses to stop the horses from taking off of the stagecoach into what would be imminent death. And so they did this entire trick, and at the end of this particular trick or stunt, they would take off their hats, take off their beards and reveal to the audience that they were women. And the audience would just erupt in applause. They were just so thrilled that these women were able to accomplish this. So their story is in there too. I have some stories of women that were cowgirls in New Jersey. I have a friend from New Jersey, and she said, well, no cowgirl ever came from New Jersey, but one of the best cowgirls in the world. Her name was Adele Van Ole, and she was from New Jersey, and she was an amazing talent. I've got some pictures of her in the back there to take a look at. But as I said, these women, they proved that they could take every bit of the heartache and the heartbreak and the body break that men did in the rodeo arena, and they won several prizes, and they really moved their part in the rodeo ahead. And so these women they weren't afraid to take on anything, and so the book is just filled with these women who were quite accomplished and that would do anything daring to bring in an audience. One of the chapters in the book is about horse diving. And you have to come back and take a picture of that, because these women would lead horses up this enormous ramp, and then hold the horse there, and then have the horse dive down into water with them on top. Now, the best one at that particular trade was a woman who was blind, which would be the only way that I could probably do that trick. But she was, it was an act that everybody would come to see, the horse diving. So as I said, these women had great acts in the arena, and some of them had tragic lives and had tragic personal lives. But that's what made telling their stories so much fun, what they went through. One of the ladies I just finished writing about was a woman by the name of Lucille Richards, who was an accomplished rodeo star who got into some trouble when her rodeo manager and boyfriend ends up murdered, and she's arrested for his murder. She's later acquitted of that particular charge, and then leaves rodeo to become an aviatrix during World War II. And she does amazing things as an aviatrix, and when that's over, she goes back into the rodeo again. Again, accomplished women. I've been able to write about a lot of accomplished women and the wonderful things that they've done. I've written from soiled dove to suffragettes and all in between. So, does anybody have any questions about these ladies, about the subject matter, about...
I'm going to ask the first two questions. One is, how did all this affect the women's movement, influence it? And also, can you give a little bit more detail about that first cowgirl rodeo?
Oh, boy. Well, you know what? I got to tell you, I didn't come prepared to talk about that, Tom. That's going to be in the book, and so folks will just have to read that part of it in the book. I did write about that extensively. In terms of how this helped the women's movement, or suffrage at that time, it did indeed help men to see that women could be accomplished, and there were things that women could do, and that because they were able to do these kinds of things, they surely could vote. They surely had the mindset to be able to vote. And so when the 19th Amendment was ratified in August 1920, these ladies were at the forefront of that to be able to point to as women who could vote. And many of these women were able to vote in Wyoming because they performed in Wyoming, and Wyoming was one of the very first states to be able to have women to vote. They were allowed to vote in 1870. Suffrage was passed there in 1869, and so if you were riding in a rodeo and you were a rider in that particular place, you could vote. So, anybody else have any questions?
Questions, comments, protests? This is the library. You can say what you want. Okay, back here in the back.
I'm sorry about that. I concentrated a lot on these personal lives because I was absolutely flabbergasted that these women, Fox Hastings would be married multiple times and just be so brokenhearted over her husband's death. And I think he was like number 5 or 6. So that she'd take her own life. Yes?
I'd like to know if you have any photographs of them, in action? They did take photographs of them, right?
I have lots of photographs of them in action in the book, and then I brought photographs with me. So you can come back to the table and I will show you those photographs.
They're stunning photographs.
And a lot of these, the Pendleton Rodeo was very popular, and so that's some of the folks who had the first images of from the Pendleton Rodeo. And of course, the Cheyenne Frontier Days, there's lots of pictures. But yeah, they're the great photos of these women in the middle of a buck on the back of a horse, but they were sticking in the saddle. Some of them falling off. As you probably know, women in rodeo, things kind of took a dark turn when Bonnie McCarroll dies being thrown from a bucking horse. And so women in rodeo, you don't see too many of the women doing the bronc riding anymore, and that's because things changed after Bonnie McCarroll.
Questions, comments?
This gentleman down here had a question.
Okay. Let me bring you the mic, please.
Kind of related to his earlier question, I was wondering, like, how well the women were tolerated in the profession by the men, and sort of what percentage of the rodeo participants were women versus men?
I think the ratio would be 10% out of the rodeo riders, the 10% of those would be women. And I never came across anything where men objected to women being in the rodeos. Never came across anything like that. And I think it was because of the American West. I think women were allowed, if you're west of the Mississippi, I think women were allowed to do a lot more, and it was tolerated, especially if you proved it. I mean, if Fox Hastings, you said women couldn't bulldog, and Fox Hastings comes out and wrestles a steer to her ground in 17 seconds, I think you say nothing. So I think that I never came across anything where men said, get these women out of here. They were happy to have them because they sold tickets. So,
what happened during the hard years, like the Depression years, to this industry for them? Were they shut down, or did they keep going?
That's when people came up with different things to keep it going, and that's when you find things like horse diving and a lot of outrageous acts that you wouldn't ordinarily see. That's when those kinds of things came into being. It's the same thing with baseball. You had to come up with different ways to be able to keep that going. So, yeah, I mean, so these women just came up with different stunts. And so you have them doing stunts like riding underneath the horse. I've got a great picture of a woman doing that. She's riding underneath the horse at full speed. And so you came up with those just to keep people coming in. And the other way that they kept coming in is they would defy people like May Manning Lilly. If you came to a Pawnee Bill show, they would challenge people in the ticket buyers to come and take on May Manning Lilly. If you could shoot as many glass balls riding side saddle as May Manning Lilly, you won $500. I mean, it was a substantial amount of money, a big chunk of what they made at the... So those kinds of things kept it going.
I might add, when I saw that picture of the woman diving off into the lake on a horse, I thought, this has got to be a fake photograph. And also, you'll see a woman riding under a horse. I thought, there's no way, because I'm a little bit of a horse rider myself, but not near what those women did.
Another stunt that they often did was called the death drag, where you were standing upside down in the saddle. They also did something, and it's got some great pictures back there, called the Roman riding, where the women put one foot on one horse and one foot on another horse and held the reins and then rode on top of them like that. So people would come to see those kinds of things. Even in the Depression, you would, whatever you could do, however you could scrape together a couple of pennies to come out and see it. So it really thrived, kind of took people's minds off things.
Anyone last minute questions? Okay, back here. Diane, you're giving me my workout.
You guys are so good to come out on a Sunday afternoon to listen to the stories about these cowgirls. I do have the books for sale in the back. They are $20 a piece. I can do a check or I can do cash, but I can't do the credit card thing. I'm sorry about that.
What I was going to say is I haven't been to a lot of rodeos lately, but Mark and I went to one over in Garland. Oh, it was called the Wild West Show. And what you're talking about, the girls, they would ride Roman style. Sometimes they'd have like 3 horses. And they would ride underneath the horses and all that.
Right.
I was just thinking strictly about bull riding and you know, all of that. But I didn't know you were including the wild, you know, riding side saddled and where they would ride and they would get off the horse while they're riding and they go down underneath and they get back up on the horse the other way.
Right.
And we did see this over in Garland at a little rodeo over there, a little sports arena that they had. And they had someone that was, I think they were doing a handstand while the horse was riding.
I called that the death drag, but I don't think that's the death drag. I think the death drag is when you were in the saddle and you're laying back over the horse way down. So I think that's, I mean, I'm amazed that they were able to survive any of those stunts, but some of these women are incredibly good. And then trick ropers as well. I was telling you about Hazel Hickey Moore. I mean, can you imagine going out on your horse as a trick roper and then stopping for a moment to sing an operatic ballad of blue skies while the doves fly up and then come and land on you and your horse? But that was the act, and people would come and see that time and time again.